Welcome, EcoQuest Challenge participants, to this December's EcoQuest Challenge. Learn how to read, where I will walk you through the different ID characteristics and ecology of invasive and native Phragmites, or common reeds, so you can participate in this month's scavenger hunt. Like many of our former EcoQuest Challenge species, Phragmites has found a variety of different ways to take over our natural areas and native ecosystems. Phragmites australis, it's called, is an invasive common reed. It's also referred to as European reed. It's a perennial grass that's native to Middle East and Europe and was likely introduced to the United States via ship ballast in the 1800s, but it quickly colonized many different habitat types and is capable of doing it in both high quality and disturbed habitats. It's now found in most regions of the US, and we're talking from southwestern deserts to eastern salt marshes to northern lakes. It's certainly a highly invasive species that has adapted to a variety of different environmental conditions. This picture to the right here is probably one that you've seen before in our region in wetland type of habitats. Even in constructed landscape settings, this dense monoculture, these extensive high biomass colonies where not much other plant life can persist under it or around it at all. So the question is, how did it get to this point? How did it get so bad? Well, it originally and still is promoted in constructed wetlands as treatment for municipal sewage, for storm overflow, overflow containment, and development reclamation projects. So in other words, it was purposefully spread and planted in multiple areas by humans. The problem is that it is a prolific reproducer and has multiple different mechanisms for spreading into other natural areas. So its primary means of spread is vegetative. And it does that through both rhizomes, which are root-like structures that you can see here that are usually below the ground surface that spread out horizontally, and new shoots can come from that. And it can also spread through runners or stolons, which are primarily above ground horizontal stems. To make matters even worse, Phragmites also has the ability to spread through fragmentation of its rhizomes or its above ground stem fragments. Adding to its ability to infiltrate other natural areas is that its seeds and fragments can be dispersed through wind, as you can see here, as well as it survives in water and can spread over water as well. Here's a picture of those rhizomes that we were talking about before. They can grow up to 6 feet per year and can run over 30 feet. And like every few inches, a new stalk can grow from that. So it's got a variety of different mechanisms for reproduction and lots of different ways it can infiltrate our natural areas in our region. But what we're focusing on today are what are its ID characteristics so we can distinguish it and begin reporting it in the environment. So, it is common reed. It can reach up to 15 feet tall. It's easily identifiable by its stiff, erect stems that grow straight up. Its leaves, as you can see in this picture here, grow alternately along the top half of the stem. And I always like to have little tricks of remembering it. To me, its appearance looks like the Grim Reaper. It's like the Grim Reaper of wetlands type habitats, right? Where this scythe blade is very much like the blade of the leaf blade of Phragmites. That leaf grows alternately along the top half, and you can see that it grows on both sides, or it can just grow on one side of that stem. Those leaves are usually 1+ inches wide and taper to a point. So again, that sort of side-like blade appearance. It's also recognizable by its inflorescence, right? Or its collection of flowers, seed head of a plant here. So you can see it here. This almost forms the head of the Grim Reaper, right? And it usually has a very dense sometimes it's 1 to 2 feet in length, and they sort of the seed heads or inflorescence tends to drape over. So erect stems growing straight up, and sort of these like dense seed heads or inflorescence growing at the top here. So your mission is, of course, as always, to find and report an invasive. So in this case, invasive Phragmites, by posting it to iNaturalist. But we're really encouraging all of you to take on the extra additional challenge of finding a rare, less common native subspecies or American common reed. And if you do go through that extra process of determining whether it's the native or invasive, please find and report, post to us and to iNaturalist possible native Phragmites stands. So again, this is less common as something that we are trying to protect versus the invasive common reed or European reed. You know, we're really trying to get a handle on and prevent its further spread. So winter is a great time to look and distinguish between them. So the rest of this presentation is going to be on how to distinguish between the two of them. So again, late winter, as we are going out now, one of the main things you can be looking for are the tips or these inflorescences, right? So again, you're going to look for those like tannish reed beds and then look for the inflorescence of the heads of those reeds. So the inflorescence of the native Phragmites tends to be thin and fewer branches to it. But you look at the invasive Phragmites, much denser, thicker, right? A much more fuller and branched inflorescence than the native one, which is a little sparser. You can also look for, and this is what I really encourage you to do, is to go right up to a stand of Phragmites and look at the stems or the lower stems of this. So each of the stems are protected by a sheath, okay? And these are different layers or these sheaths. You'll often find like a mildew appearance on it. You see these like blackened stains on it. So that mildewy appearance, but you can peel back that sheath to expose what is called the culm or the inner stem part of this. So I encourage you to take a look at that sheath. The sheath of the native Phragmites tends to break off very easily, leaving behind the exposed culms. At this time of year, it may be that the sheath of the native is has fallen off. Or if it hasn't, there's a huge gap. Look at this picture here on the native. You see that big gap between the sheath and then that culm in the middle here? So if you're finding big gaps between it, or most of the sheath has fallen off, you're probably looking at the native species versus the invasive Phragmites. The sheath is really kind of closely attached to that culm or inner stem. It's more likely to persist on the stems following the season. So as you peel back these layers, it's harder to peel back. And the invasive, you'll have multiple layers to peel off. Versus the native, a lot of the sheaths have already fallen off, or there's like huge gaps between it and really easy to peel. The invasive, harder to peel, multiple layers, more closely attached to the stem. So once those sheaths are peeled back, you can also look at the culm itself or that inner stem itself. So the native species, the sheaths are again naturally shed to reveal the culm. And the culm is relatively smooth and shiny versus the invasive Phragmites. Again, you're going to find more of these parallel ridges. If you can look very closely here, you can see those parallel lines running. So when you touch it, it'll be a little bit rougher and you'll start to see those parallel ridges here along the line. Versus in the native, it's a little bit smoother, shinier, and those parallel ridges are not as obvious. And again, I want to point out, because this becomes important later, is that this mildew, these mildew stains, you can find in both native and invasive. So, you know, that is not a diagnostic feature of it. And I want to point that out because another thing you can be looking for is a presence of a fungus. And fungus gives the appearance of these circular black dots. For whatever reason, this fungus only seems to impact native Phragmites. And I'm not talking about those mildew stains that we talked about before that are a little bit more evenly spread out. You can see it here and here. And you can find that in both invasive and native Phragmites. I'm talking about circular dots. They only seems to impact the native Phragmites. So if you see the presence of these dots after you peel back those sheaths, it's a good indication that you're looking at a native Phragmites. Versus the lack of these fungal spots doesn't really mean anything. It could be native or invasive, but if you do see those black dots, it is indicative that it is native, but again, can't be relied upon as a sole characteristic for identification. So just to summarize, you know, how do you, now that you want to go out, what is the first step? So first of all, you're going to look for stands of tannish brown reeds. Look for that grim reaper-like appearance to its inflorescence and those scythe-like leaves that I pointed out before along the stems that alternate. And then think to yourself, do the inflorescences or the heads look full and have lots of branches? If so, I've color coded this as red. If it looks very full and has lots of branches, is indicative that's invasive, red, stop, invasive Phragmites. However, if those inflorescences are a little bit sparser with fewer branches on the inflorescence itself, then it's maybe indicative of a native Phragmites. But again, you got to look for other ID characteristics. So then I encourage you to walk up to one of the reeds and investigate its lower stem. Is the sheath pretty intact and closely attached to the stem? Or do you have to peel back multiple layers to get to the culm? If so, if the sheath is pretty intact and you're peeling back lots of layers to get to the inner culm, then it's probably invasive Phragmites. However, if the sheath is loosely attached with large gaps between the layer and the culm, or the sheath is starting to fall off, has fallen off, quickly exposing the culm, then it's more indicative of native Phragmites. Then once you have those sheath layers peeled off, look at the exposed culm. Does the culm still have parallel ridges on it, or is it rougher? If so, it's probably invasive Phragmites, or is it relatively smooth and shiny? That would be more indicative of native Phragmites. And last but not least, look for the presence of those notably circular black spots. If you see circular black spots, then it's indicative of native Phragmites. But don't confuse it with mildew, which is more spread out, black but more spread out. It's the circular black fungal spots that you are looking for that only seems to impact native Phragmites, but the lack of spots is not a diagnostic feature of either. So in terms of posting to iNaturalist, what are the instructions? If and when you find a common reed bed, you can, and you take a picture of it, upload it to iNaturalist as Phragmites australis or common reed. However, if you, upon further investigation, you start peeling back those sheaths, right, and you believe you may have found a stand of native Phragmites, which again is much less common, we're really trying to find in our environment here in the Hudson Valley in northern New Jersey, then please alert us with an email and photo or a reference to that iNaturalist post, date, and location so we can double check for you. Of course, we'll be curating the iNaturalist posts in general, but please alert us. It would be great to know if you happen to find a native stand. So take on that additional challenge to help us out. And of course, you can always email us with questions. And if you do need to get in contact with us, please email us at invasives@nynjtc.org. And of course, visit our Lower Hudson Prism EcoQuest website for more ID features and more details on that, as well as links to videos of a lot of the features that I've talked about before. So thank you again to our partners for allowing us to run this really fun scavenger hunt style EcoQuest challenge, and look forward to your participation in this month's Learn How to Read EcoQuest challenge.